So when I showed up at University of Michigan last fall, I thought that UX had a lot to do with programming and graphic design, and I didn't really have a lot of experience with either of those things because I spent 2 years doing archaeology before I showed up, which meant that I dug in the dirt in Ohio, which didn't really seem that pertinent. But about a couple months into being at Michigan, I had this one realization where I decided that archaeology is really the study of past people and how they interacted with their physical environment. And human-computer interaction is how present people interact with their digital environment. And once I made that realization, other things started falling into place. And some of these things that I came up with may seem fundamental to you, but to me as a student, they really meant a lot. And the first thing is that you never see the complete picture, ever. So in archaeology, you might find a flake that's smaller than your fingernail. And that flake comes off an arrowhead, which came off of an arrow, which a hunter carried and was wearing furs. But you never see any of that except for the flake. And so you have to take that flake and interpolate it into everything else. In the same way, if you're looking at analytics, or if you're looking at eye tracking, or if you're looking at even user testing results, you're never seeing that full picture, ever. You'll never see what they're thinking. Even if they tell you what they're thinking, it's probably not what they're thinking. And so, I think it's important to use a lot of methods to try and get as complete of a picture as you can, but also be comfortable with that incomplete picture and be confident in using interpolation when you need to. The second thing, which is something that might not be as prevalent in UX, is that context is paramount. In archaeology, if you find an artifact that isn't in the context that it comes from, it's basically worthless. And I think the same is true in UX. If you do data or research that takes place on desktop, maybe it doesn't make sense in mobile. Data that was gathered for commercial use isn't really maybe that useful for personal use. Maybe it is, but I think it's something that you need to look at critically and think of the context of the creation of data, the context of the experience that you're designing for, and try and prepare for those new contexts that maybe are unintentional. The third thing is... One second. Okay. When you observe something, you intrinsically change it. So this is Malinowski, an anthropologist from the 1950s who lived with a bunch of islanders to get an insider perspective, which is great, but you change it. If you're doing user testing and you have people sitting in a room next to an instructor, of course, that's not their natural habitat. If you're doing eye tracking software and you have these cameras looking up at you creepily, it's going to change. You're going to be thinking about it. And this is unavoidable. But the key is really to be aware of the differences and to be able to account for them and to minimize them and try and recreate as much as possible a real life experience. The next one is when you look at a site like this, you see it in an instant. But you could be talking about thousands of years of occupation where people have showed up, built something, reused it, abandoned it, come back. And in the same way, when you look at a website, you're looking at thousands of hours of evolution and things being ignored, things being rebuilt. And so it may not all make sense. And that's a good explanation, but it's not necessarily a good excuse. So even though you can look at the context of creation, the context of use is still really what's important. And that ability to view something in an instant without the baggage of who made it, when it was made, for whom, I think especially as an outside person, you can really say, why is that there? It makes no sense. All right, iteration is messy. So this is a schematic drawing of a Viking hall that was rebuilt many, many times, made better and better each time, and it looks like a mess. When I was in school, I saw a diagram like this, which looks really clean. But if you do this a couple times, you're going to end up with a lot of stuff. And that's okay. And you just have to be okay with that. And realize that some of that stuff is good and you should keep it. And some of that stuff maybe isn't so good and you should throw it away. Because something existed before you were there, something's going to show up after you're gone, and you just be comfortable with that. And the last thing, which is only here because I only had 19 slides when I was finished, is that archaeology can be dirty and frustrating and draining, and really if you're there with a good group of people, And if you can remember those victories and those really awesome artifacts you found, it just makes it worth it. And the same in UX.